everybody. Welcome back to the Jump Show. It's episode 5 of the Ante-Post series ahead of the Cheltenham Festival. We hope you're all well. Thank you for the continued support, which is still flooding in. We'd love to reach the 250 like mark this week, and we have reached already our 2,500 subscriber mark. So thank you so much for those who click that button. We'd love to get to 3,000, of course. That's our next target whenever we can. Jake and Dan are back this week. We're going to be looking at the DRF in a significant amount of detail before going on to our Ante-Post selections. I say Jake and Dan, I'm going to nickname them the Guinness brothers, because no doubt there was a huge amount of that black stuff consumed over the weekend. You were both there. Jake, did you have a good time?
Yeah, very good. It was a top-class weekend, but it wasn't marred without some difficulties. Forgot my passport. Getting to the airport was a great start to the weekend. Thankfully, you're allowed to fly on your driver's license, so a bit of groveling, and I managed to get on the plane. And then after the weekend finished, I got back to my car at the airport, and I had a flat tire, so that was even better. So it was a great weekend, other than the logistics of getting to Dublin and back. But yeah, really looking forward to reviewing it.
So you managed to find your driving license, but then you couldn't use it, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're just waving it at the car like, please work.
We got back eventually.
Good man, glad to hear it. That sounds pretty turbulent, I have to say. Dan, I've got to say, I won't lie, I was a little bit concerned about you getting through the whole DRF 3 days, but I hear that you managed it with aplomb.
Oh, I was also extremely concerned. I had harrowing memories of the Monday trip back last year. It was generally the longest day of my life. Yesterday, by comparison, I got back at like 9:30 in the evening after a flight back and a train back all the way to Lincolnshire. Actually, not too bad. I feel a bit tired this morning, but compared to this time last year, my word, I am as fresh as a daisy. So it all went. It was one of those weekends where us three were all kind of looking at each other going, this is all going, well, bar Jake's obviously passport debacle. This is all going too well. Like, it was just all going so well. We were backing winners. The racing was great. We were having a good time. We weren't on death's door the morning after. Good times were had by all, or at least by us three, until Jake was on either side of the passport control.
Yeah. Before we get going on the DRF review itself, lads, I actually wanted to ask you, either one of you can answer this. What was the biggest cheer coming back into the winners' enclosure? I'm going to assume it was for Galopin Des Champs after he won the Gold Cup.
By a mile. Yeah. People were sprinting to get to the parade ring for him. It was one of those moments you're just happy to be there for. So
Yeah.
by him by a mile. But the atmosphere all weekend was good. It was one of those where it was busy and lively, but you never felt it was too busy. Like everything was manageable. You could go get a drink whenever you wanted. Like there was no issues there. But the reception for Galopin Des Champs is something I will remember for a very long time.
Yeah, I heard the Ole Ole's on the TV, and it was yeah, it was one of those moments you kind of wish you were there in a way. It was a bit like I wasn't there when Faheen won his great one there in that Norris Chase, and that looked an amazing atmosphere. Let's move on, shall we, to the actual Grade Ones, and we're going to start by Nathaniel Lacey, which of course the first race of the weekend. Jake, comes to you for this. Final Demand was a favourite for this. I was quite keen to take him on with something at a bigger price before the race. How silly I look now, because he was really impressive.
And you certainly weren't alone on that. Like, many people wanted to take him on. The stats said that he could not win that on his second start. And he's gone and done it so professionally, hasn't he? He looked like he'd been a novice who'd been racing since November, like, every month. So, yeah, fair play to him. He did everything right. Just travelled really strongly under Bulltown, didn't he? And went and put away Wingman very easily. I thought it was a very taking performance, and it's clearly, catapulted him up to the top of the Turners division. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't fault him. He did everything right. It was a shame to see like the likes of Super Sunday not give him a race. You thought off the back of his last run, perhaps he could go and bounce on and try and challenge for a Grade 1 like this, but he was absolutely nowhere. Just was too keen and ended up being pulled up. Wingman is an interesting one because they're now talking about going to the Bartlett with him. I wouldn't see him really being good enough for that. But yeah, potentially that's where he'll end up. He needs another run if he's going to go for a handicap hurdle. And then just also to say, like, the only thing I would mention about this race is the fact that the Yellow Clay probably has beaten Wingman just as easily as Final Demand. I'm not saying that means that the Yellow Clay can put it up to Final Demand. I mean, I'm sure he'll give him a good race. It'd be interesting to see what they end up doing with the Yellow Clay, because I do still think that Bartlett is going to be very tempting come declaration stage, just to skip this clash of the New Lion and Final Demand, who are now very short at the top of the market. But yeah, very impressive from Final Demand. You can't argue with that.
Yeah, the yellow clay, once the horse I called Stinky, actually has a very good chance of winning the Grade 1 at the Cheltenham Festival. I'm not very
He
pleased with
does.
that, I have to say. Yeah, he does. I don't know if either of you saw it because you were both obviously at the track, but there was quite a curious interview given by Willie Mullins to Nick Luck, a pretty long interview about where most of his horses were going to go at Cheltenham after most of the races had finished on Sunday. And Final Demand was brought up, and Nick was saying, where you're going to go to the Albert Bartlett, you're going to go to the Turners, and Willie kind of looked at him as though he was mad. So, well, obviously the Turners is the target, and then Nick
Yeah.
brought up the fact that Fran Berry had said, well, actually, I think he might have a good chance in the Albert Bartlett. But it was kind of strange the fact that Willie did just look at him as though it was the most obvious thing in the world to go to the Turners. Whereas obviously Nathaniel Lacey, I know it's over 2.6 and dropping back to 2.5 is no stranger to Willie, but you'd think that the Albert Bartlett would be something in his consideration too, but clearly not, Jake.
Well, he's powered
I
for the
mean,
line as well. It's just
Yeah.
it's such a strange comment. And also, he said it's never crossed my mind. You entered him for the race. So at some stage, it physically must have crossed your mind. Like, make it make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, he would have just as good a chance in the Bartlett as he would in the Turners, wouldn't he? But I'm guessing Willie's way of thinking is that the Turners and the Supreme, I think, are his much more classier races than a Bartlett, which I think is probably the opinion most people hold, isn't it? So perhaps he's just a bit too good for the Bartlett, but as you said, he would have a good chance in either.
Yeah, and I can see why, Willie thinks he'd be too good, but it was just the kind of look of astonishment that had even been suggested by anyone yet. It
Yeah.
looked like a pretty
Yeah, with the 2 mile 6 grade 1, how dare you suggest stepping up to 3? We're at that
good
time of year,
stuff.
folks. We never know what's going to come out of that man's mouth.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, on to the Spring Juvenile. Dan, over to you. Hello, neighbour. I thought that was really pretty impressive. I thought he did it well in the Grade 2 on his first start over hurdles, and that was a mighty effort to do on this, opening his account over obstacles. But I thought this was a different class performance. That was really good.
Yeah, I wouldn't probably be as bullish as you are on it. I thought he did enough wrong in the early stages. He was pretty keen again, despite the first time hood. He jumped the first three pretty poorly, but he did improve in both regards as the race went on. But the same couldn't be said for St. Lucie, who took a wild pull at one stage and just completely threw her chance away at an early stage, which obviously somewhat dented the form. And it was a bit like Christmas, really. I mean, at least we managed to see a bit more of what he actually did, but he got there going easily. It looked like he was going to win a shade cozy and was then getting closed on all the way to the line by Galileo Dame and actually only just held on yet again. Look, he's 4 from 4 in his career. He's clearly very, very talented. You just worry the way he's finishing these races. I don't know if it's whether he's holding enough for himself or he's just really barely gets 2 miles. So you then have to look at the triumph over pretty much 2 mile 1 up a hill when you've seen the likes of East India Doc absolutely sprint up that hill. Hard to necessarily see him at this stage taking to that kind of strong staying finish that's required the same way. So while it was a good performance, he's clearly a good horse. They're going to have a lot of fun with him on both codes, I'd imagine. I still think he probably has a bit to find with the likes of Lulamba and East India Dog.
Yeah, it looks a strong division, I think, with those two in it for sure. Back to you, Jake, because we saw Madgeborough win the Irish Arkle, and I'm looking forward to the Cheltenham Festival and seeing Madgeborough just staring into the coattails of Sergino up that Cheltenham Hill. How do you? But do you? I mean, I know I sound a bit facetious there. I do think Sergino is going to outclass him completely, even though Madgeborough is clearly very good. Do you see a world in which Madgeborough could win that race at Cheltenham?
Well, there's obviously a world because he's a very, very good horse. This is where the atmosphere really started to build for the day for obviously the magic of Saturday at the DRF because every single time that Madgeborough jumped out of Mark Welsh's hands, you could hear a ooh if he got in tight, or you could hear a yes if he jumped it well, and it really was an amazing atmosphere watching him go down the back and then turn for home. Obviously, he pecked on landing a couple of times, and there was just these massive ooh every single time. So it was fun to watch. But yeah, no, like he's absolutely hacked around, isn't he? Like he's done it in. I wouldn't say he's had to have a hard race to go and win by 9 lengths, and he's gone and done it easily. Like the clash between him and Sergino. Okay, Sergino is clearly going to be the favourite for that and has all the form in the book to suggest that he is probably the better horse. But it's going to be an amazing battle if they both get there to the Arkle. Like obviously we're going to see Sergino this weekend in an open company Grade 2, which will potentially set his form to a whole new level again. But I think Madgeborough is right up there with him. I think they'll have an amazing battle, and I really just hope we get to see them going, hammer and tong the whole way around, almost Irish champion hurdle-esque between the two of them. But yeah, it'll be a fascinating race. I wouldn't have a strong opinion either way, to be honest with you, but Mashburn was very good. And the only thing that really annoyed me here was that Touch Me Not just finished way too close to him. I wanted him as a Grand Annual plot. He was having his fourth run. He's only been beaten 9 lengths and he's gone up a couple pounds for that. So he's up to a mark of 151 now in Ireland, which that just probably puts him out of the handicap. And it's another example, as we'll probably mention a few times this podcast, of the Irish handicapper just absolutely slaughtering his runners this weekend at the DRF. These Irish runners have been very harshly treated on the handicapper men's this Monday.
Yeah, good to hear. Might give us a chance of winning a couple of Galopin Des Champs, we mentioned at the top of the show, Dan winning the Irish Gold Cup. And Jake's written on the running order, Galopin Des Champs is the king. And to be honest, I would have to agree.
What more could you say? He is the king. He's the king of Leopardstown. He's the king of racing, really, at the minute. I think finally he's now the most popular horse in training, and that kind of was exemplified at the weekend. And it kind of all built to a perfect crescendo because while the race was still relatively slowly run, he did get the run of it. It was the image of him leading on the runs of the last, and there was about 4 or 5 who looked like they were coming into it. Paul was then squeezing away, and you're thinking that it didn't. I don't think it mattered who you backed or who you or anything like that. I think the entirety of Leopardstown was firmly on Galopin Des Champs' side to pull away, and he did it yet again. Jumped the last well, quickened up again to leave his rivals behind him, and it's just the most likable horse now. Like he is up there with one of the greats at this stage for what he's continuing to achieve, the performance he's continuing to put in, and as we said earlier, that watching him, everyone kind of sprint to the parade ring to follow him in was the highlight of the weekend, unquestionably for me. Some good runs in behind. Obviously, Fat the Fire was an interesting one because he settled better. I say it was relatively quickly run again. Did come there with his challenge, but then was beaten to second by Grange Clare West, who's run a career best. I think Monty Starr has run a blinder in the circumstances, given how a lot of Henry de Bromhead's runners are going on ground, probably quicker than ideal. I think, as I've probably said for a while now, he's still probably the most likely to fill the frame in a Gold Cup, I'd say, by some distance, Monty Starr. And Jake's ultimate dream is finally quashed. Now he's up to a mark 159. At least I don't have to hear that propaganda anymore. And then I know where you're thinking. Again, ran brilliantly well. Just have no idea where he's going to turn up because every big target seems to be off the table for him. So a bit of a strange one for those in behind. But look, Galopin Des Champs is just a spectacular horse. It's a privilege to watch him run. And he'll take all the beating in the Gold Cup. And I think hopefully we can all go into next season maybe asking, can he do it again?
Yeah, I mean, for me, he's the best since Corto. And I don't think there's a world. I don't think there's ever a world in which I'm going to be able to say he's better than Corto just because of what Corto did over different trips. And
Yeah.
I think Galopin is clearly at his best over 3 miles plus. 2.5 isn't really his game. So I think that would kind of put Corto slightly above him. But yeah, he's an absolute powerhouse of a horse, isn't he? Great to watch. Jake, come back to you. Ballyburn. I wasn't that taken by Ballyburn beating Croke Park. I think everyone does Croke Park a bit of a disservice because he's clearly improved over fences and he's tough as old boots, but it took him a while to go past.
Yeah, Croke Park is the most criminally underrated novice chase we've had this season. Like, he's won 2 Grade 1s and then given Ballyburn a hell of a race in another Grade 1 at Leopardstown. Like, fair play to him. Yeah, I thought he put in a great performance. But yeah, Ballyburn, yeah, I mean, he battled back to go and win in the end, didn't he? Over 2 mile, 5.5 furlongs. Like, if you're backing him for the RSA of the Brown Advisory now, like you'd be, I wouldn't say you'd be confident, but you'd be much more confident now than you were before the race that he can stay because he clearly powered on through to the line. I'd still have a few question marks if it was a proper slog of a race, and you've got the likes of a Dancing City in there and etc. But yeah, I mean he's done everything that you'd want him to do because, as you said, he got to the last and he was behind Croke Park, and he's managed to go and beat Croke Park. So fair play to him. I thought it was a good performance. Imperial Pass really disappointed me here. Like, he just never got put in the race at all, did he? Never seemed happy. It was a shame not to see him trying to challenge towards the finish because I thought that coming into the season and coming into this race, especially, that he was a proper Grade 1 contender as well. And he's kind of put his challenge to the wayside there. And then, as I said, Croke Park, it has kind of helped me a little bit because I think he's boosted that Better Days Ahead form no end. And Better Days Ahead is going to be running in the 10 Up Novice Chase on Sunday. So I don't think there's going to be much for him to take on there, but hopefully he can put in a nice impressive performance, and then he'll be, relatively short in the Brown advisory market as well, but off the back of this. So one thing to note on Croke Park as well is that Gordon Elliott has said that he might be a 2.5 mile horse rather than a 3 mile horse. So he's not a, guaranteed runner in the Brown advisory. That's something that you've got to, be aware of if you do fancy him for Cheltenham. But yeah, I thought Ballyburn did everything he could do. And whilst he still has some questions to ask, there's not much more he could have done in this race.
I've never seen a man so happy about a non-runner as Jake was about Better Days Ahead getting mysteriously withdrawn on account of the going change. The ground was exactly the same as the Saturday. No, going. I spotted one bit of rain. Going change. Yep, let's take him out. Yeah, interesting tactics there.
Probably a good call, to be honest. And come back to you again, Jake. Yeah, exactly. That's what that's what the great game's all about. Got to keep those dreams going. If you haven't got them, what have you got? Really? Jake, back to you for Kopeck Day board. I think plenty would say that was the performance of the weekend. I think what we were all concerned about beforehand, wasn't it, was the jumping, because he was so lackadaisical on his hurdling debut. But that was just amazing.
Oh, it absolutely was. Yeah, my biggest celebration of the whole weekend was when he got to the first and he jumped it without going through the hurdle with his legs sticking out the back.
He made his shape. Get in.
Yeah, it literally was that. And then after that, he just never looked back, did he? He jumped them better and better. I thought he was a really, really impressive performance. The only problem now is that obviously I put him up for the Turners last week, and I think 2 years in a row now I've put up the supreme winner in the Turners. Obviously Slade Steele last year, I was very keen on him for the Turners. He ended up going back to the Supreme and winning it, and I think Kopeck could be doing the exact same here because he's absolutely destroyed them over 2 miles. There seems to be no real doubt in Willie Mullins' mind about which trip they're going to run over, especially with Final Demand putting in the performance he did the day before and looking like it, being Turners bound. He shortened really nicely for the Turners, but he's now 11 to 10, 6 to 4 max limit for the Supreme. I think that's going to be where he ends up, isn't it, to be honest with you? So as much as we can still have a tiny bit of hope that Willie Mullins is Willie Mullins and he may just change his mind like a flick of a pen, I think that it's looking very likely he goes to the Supreme and he'll take all the beating because this, as I said, was just a spectacular performance to jump the last and then get back on the bridle and just coast home to win by 13 lengths. I thought it was mega performance. Carniquet, obviously in second, he has done a lot of people a disservice this weekend now because he was on Martin Pipe's shortlist. He was on every shortlist for a handicap at Cheltenham. This was his 5th run. All he had to do was jump around to get that qualification. And he's come second, beaten 13 lengths, and he's gone up to a mark of 144. So that probably rules him out of the Martin Pipe, I'd imagine. And yeah, a lot of people weren't too happy about that one. But Carafon, my other bet that obviously I've had for the Martin Pipe, he just jogged around for 7th. He's now qualified for the Martin Pipe, unchanged off a mark of 132 in Ireland. So I'd say all roads now lead to the Martin Pipe for him.
Yeah, I've got to say, Kopeck Day board reminds me a little bit of the year, I think it was the COVID year when Appreciate It won the Supreme for Willie, because Appreciate It obviously stays further than 2 miles and has been campaigned over further than 2 miles ever since, really. And Kopeck clearly stays further than 2. But I think they went that route, didn't they? Because the Supreme that year was quite weak. And it looks to be of a similar ilk this year. I mean, you look down the list and you've got Salvatore Mundi and then Work Ahead and then a smattering of others. You probably won't be able to win it. So it does look, very winnable, doesn't it, Jake?
It does, yeah. And I think Salvatore Mundi was the one that I was kind of banking on being the horse that would keep these horses apart. But on the judge on that performance, he's achieved way more than Salvador Mundi has ever achieved on the track. So you'd have to say that they're within their rights to go to a Supreme after that.
Yeah. I've got to say I was pretty pleased to see Solness win the Dublin Chase on Sunday. It was like watching the film Groundhog Day, Dan. It was something I'd seen before. And weirdly, no one in behind seemed to react to it.
Yeah, and there was a quite interesting clip. I don't know if any of you've seen it with Hugh Carhill for the Irish coverage of him basically going to bat for saying, "What on earth is everyone else doing in behind?" And the ex-jockeys on the punditry channel were, no, what you want about it? It's all fine. And I kind of have to see the jockey's perspective on this because you look at the finishing speed of Solness, it was 95%. He's gone ridiculously hard early, and the only horse who really tried to go with him was Rachel and Calixios, but he just couldn't live with that pace early on, whether that's a result of the yard not being in great form because Calixios has put him behind at Sandown quite comfortably in the past. So maybe that's somewhat ailed him, but nothing else could really live with the pace Solness was going during the mid part of that race. And say he hasn't sprinted home, he's crawled home, but nothing else was really able to get to within striking distance. So he's clearly just extremely inform, effective horse on decent ground when able to kind of go that pace. Now, get him on soft ground, I think he's proven in the past he isn't capable of doing it. But he will always kind of be an interesting angle, a bit of a threat in these types of races if he can keep this kind of form going because of that run style and because of his obviously clear tendency to appreciate a sound surface. As he goes in behind, as you mentioned, Gaelic Warrior ran a very similar race to last time. It's interesting now with him. Does he just need really testing ground at 2 miles? I think that'll kind of dictate where he might end up going. I say if we're looking at a soft, heavy ground opening day, then as the ARCA winner of last year, Champion Chase probably still more the likely option. But if it's not going to be that bad, you probably have to start looking at the Ryanair now, given he just couldn't seem to lay up with that kind of pace. And you'd imagine Solness will be there trying to do exactly the same in the Champion Chase, come what may. Marine Nationale, Barry Connell's getting awfully bullish again for a horse who's still for a horse who just finished second and flattened out again coming to the last. Look, he's clearly bouncing back to somewhat what we know he can be, but I think John Bond supporters and fans would have slept fairly comfortably regardless after that race had finished.
Yeah, I think with Marine Nationale, perhaps the promising thing about him was that the way he travelled between the fourth last and the second last, and really to the last, was a lot more like it. Like it was like the Marine Nationale of old. And as you say, he didn't quite finish his race off, but I thought there was more encouragement to be gleaned there.
Yeah, and you can forgive the finishing effort, I guess, if you're in a forgiving mood because of the way the race was run and that it wasn't going to suit a horse who would be able to put his head down with a bit of a turn of foot. But it has been a while since he's actually finished a race. Like that's kind of been his problem. Obviously, we saw this time last year when he seemingly stuck his head up in the air, wind issues reported, and thereafter it's kind of been a not too dissimilar story on all of his 3 starts since. So that would be a concern. He may well travel into a champion chase. I'm not sure whether he'd see it out up the hill, to be honest. But yeah, Barry Connell's giving it the big one again, which is always interesting to see. It was also right a couple of years ago, but it hasn't all been plain sailing for them since.
Well, it is the start of February, and it wouldn't be the same without a Barry Connell confidence boost, would it? So, no surprise there. And finally, Dan, we learned absolutely nothing, did we, from Lossy Mouth and State Man? What a shame that was that she came down. It's so difficult to know what would happen, and I find it quite funny actually. After the race, that everyone was saying, "Oh, State Man's got his verve back. That was the old State Man. The way he travelled and everything." But you just couldn't tell, could you? I mean,
No.
I know that he was a long way clear of the rest, but he was always going to be a long way clear of the rest, whatever happened.
Yeah, I don't think the likes of Winter Fog were going to keen to get in that battle up front in the first
Exactly.
mile. Like, yeah, no, it's just, so that was the race panning out. I mean, if you're being on again the kinder side of the scale, you'd say, well, at least with the way they were going a strong pace. Stateman was at least able to lie up, whereas at Christmas it never looked like he was able to. So that would be your positive interpretation. Obviously, the more general, pretty much more negative connotation is that, well, nothing really happened. The race completely fell apart at the mile stage, and he's just kind of coasted home in his old time. And in the end, has only won 6.5 lengths, admittedly in his own time. But I mean, he looked a pretty tired horse, I thought, at some stages in that race, probably a result of the early pace they were going. So that was the one, I'd say, real blip of the weekend of what we were looking forward to. Everything else was going so swimmingly well in terms of the results, the performances we were seeing. That was a clash we wanted. That was a clash we deserved. See, it was a heavy fall as well, Lossy Mouth took. I think they've said she's fine, but almost you could tell it's left a bit of a mark. She's a bit stiff, a bit in herself at the minute in the preceding days. So hopefully they were able to get her back. I think you still have to go champion hurdle with her, all being well, because say we haven't quite learnt yet, and hopefully we still get them kind of turn up there. And but again, Constitution Hill probably slept pretty soundly there. I'm not sure what we really make of State Man, but I think generally speaking, I've never really been convinced about Cheltenham being his track. But hey, look, an informed State Man is good for the division, but quite how informed he is, that's a question that remains to be answered.
Yeah, I think Nicky Henderson was probably rubbing his hands, going, "Here we go!" After that race at the Dublin Racing Festival. Connie Hill certainly not losing any cast in his box, that's for sure. Right, time for my favourite segment of the week. It's Jake Price Racing news updates. Take it away, Jake.
Yeah, a little bit shorter this week with just a little bit less going on. Obviously, all focus on the DRF. As I mentioned, Carniquet has been given an Irish rating of 144, so that probably rules him out for Martin Pipe. If you got bets there, potentially look at cashing those out. Definitely don't back him now. Jerry Colombe, obviously he got announced as being out for the rest of the season yesterday, so that's a shame. We won't get to see him, line up in the Gold Cup and give that a bit of an extra look. Caliph de Burle, he's going to skip Cheltenham. Obviously, the owners have got a fair amount of horses in the divisions, and after his disappointment this weekend, he's just not going to go to Cheltenham. And then finally, Il Francais has been scratched from the Gold Cup, which is obviously good news for you, Bully. That's one race down.
Come on.
He was always crying out for
there
3 mile
anyway.
2 up the hill. I can't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, they had one good look at that Irish Gold Cup and they thought, nah, we're all right. And then after that, Grey Dawning and Stage Star have also both been scratched from the Ryanair as well. So I guess that's even more good news for you, Bully.
On to Ante-Post bet number 5 from all of us. Dan, going to come to you first with a nice juicy price.
Yeah, similarly a theme. I really am going is going to be boom or bust this year. It really is, and it's not something I'm doing on purpose. It's just I think you look at the heads of a lot of these markets, particularly handicaps, and they're littered with horses who are either not qualified, very likely non-runners, or in the case of this weekend, horses who have been absolutely pulverised by the handicapper. I think going into this weekend, me and Jake were both very much on handicapper watch, and a few of the more notable ones just have been absolutely punished for it. Obviously, Storm Heart in the 2 mile handicap being the main example. A good running second, obviously good juvenile form. Up £7 for finishing second is brutal, up to 147. The winner of that, McClory, got £13 up to a mark 133. I think he was probably valued for a bit more than the winning distance, but £13 is a stiff arse, bearing in mind if he does go to the county hurdle, which he's now currently around the 6-1 favourite for, add a few more pounds onto that, he'll be well over a stone higher than he was in that race. So that all kind of made it a bit more difficult. So I've actually gone to that 2 mile handicap as the horse I'm looking at for the county hurdle, but he was actually dropped £2 to a mark 141. That's Toon Savator, but you'll probably better know for actually winning the Royal Bond in what was a bit of a surprise. Obviously, that was on decent ground, beating Romeo Coolio, but did it quite nicely there. And unlike so many of these, this is really the only race that makes any sense for him. Like, he was a novice when he won the Royal Bond. After he went to the Royal Bond and won it, they said, oh, yeah, we'll look at Christmas with him now. But I think it hadn't quite realised that his novice status had expired by the time he would have got to Christmas. So I think since then, it's been very much, I wouldn't say plodding back, but I think they've just kind of been keen to get some big race experience into him. He's been kind of forced into handicaps off a relatively high mark. He's been weak in the betting a couple of times now, and it's just kind of plodded along. He actually shaped really well in the 2.5 mile handicap at Christmas when he was having to be rerouted away from the future champions because he wasn't qualified to do so. I think for a keen going horse, going up to 2.5 miles was an interesting choice. I think it was somewhat conducive of the fact that there weren't really any options for him after they found out he couldn't run his intended target. And you look at that run back, he's travelled for the race really well. He's got to about 2 mile 2 there, still going pretty well. He's just faded out of it. He did not stay 2.5 miles on. The ground was fine for him. He just didn't stay the trip. He shaped far better than the bare result there. Obviously, then went to the 2 mile race at the DRF on pretty soft ground. I know it wasn't brutal, but you saw some horses stop to a complete walk on occasion. It was definitely taking a lot of getting. I say this is a horse who clearly wants good ground. And he shaped, again, perfectly well. Weak in the betting, kind of always towards the rear of mid-division, travelling well enough. He made an error at 3 out, which kind of put him on the back foot. Still going to 2 out, he's in a position to sneak into the race. The horse in front of him completely flattened the hurdle, which kind of, again, he was almost having to pull him back slightly because of the quick reaction to almost get out of the way of the horse who made the error and the hurdle collapsing in front of him. So that didn't help. He's then been nudged into eventually finishing 7th, being about 19 lengths, but wasn't exactly given the full treatment to go all the way to the line. Now dropped £2 to a mark 141. Obviously, he's not a novice anymore, so I can't see where else he goes. And you look at it realistically, he's 40-1. You could potentially have a Grade 2 Royal Bond winner turning up in a county hurdle, trained by Willie Mullins, who's just been dropped in a handicap after a couple of quiet enough handicap rides. I think there's every reason to believe a horse with a profile like that should be significantly shorter. Bearing in mind how some of the others are priced up, I would have thought he would have been around the 20-1 mark. But 40-1 just seemed very generous. Now, the only other one from the yard who would definitely be of interest is Ethical Diamond, who won his maiden the other day. The juvenile from last year, they held in quite high regard. Interesting to see what the handicapper does after he won that maiden, because it wasn't exactly the deepest. I think Keynesborg was in there and he was disappointing again, but he's won quite well. He would be on the radar, but he's around the 12-1 mark. So there's a significant difference in price there. Bearing in mind the profile that Toon Savator has, I just thought 40-1 for the master of this race, for a horse who's still fairly unexposed. If the ground was on the quick side, I think he would have to line up there with major interest. And obviously, that you're taking a bit on chance about the ground, but hopefully for once we actually get a bit of spring ground, and he would love that. And again, he's a ex-flat horse. We see ex-flat horses do extremely well in county hurdles. The way that Royal Bond panned out would suggest a race up the county order would really suit him. So at 40 to 1, I just thought he was probably about double the price he should be.
Yeah, really good case mate, Dan. I did think when he won the Royal Bond, he was going to go on to better things, but actually, it might well have played in your favour, I suppose, that he's not done that, but yet still retains loads of potential.
Well, I think he just found himself between a rock and a hard place and where he could really go. So he won his maiden in February of 2024. So obviously novice status was only going to last for so long. And again, I think if say Romeo Carrillo runs a good second or third in the Supreme, I think winning chances may be somewhat negated now of Cupbeck de Board. But he runs that, and then you're looking at turning up in a county hurdle, and you see the horse who beat him quite comfortably in the Royal Bond on decent ground turn up in a handicap, first time back on 2 miles on good ground since. I think that would have to be of strong interest on a mark, probably likely to be in the low 140s. Like that would surely that would then lead him to being fairly shorter than 40 to 1, and ultimately that's what we're looking for. Horses are going to get to the race much shorter prices than they are now.
Yeah, a really good case made, Dan. Thanks very much for that. That's Toon Surveyor, 40 to 1. Jake, what's your bet of the week?
Yeah, like Dan, I was adamant that I was going to find a handicap bet from the DRF this weekend to be putting up, but it's just not worked out that way as it currently stands. So I'm going to be looking elsewhere, which I didn't expect to be needing to do, but I'm looking at a race on Wednesday actually at Fairy House, which I'll come on to the name of the horse in a minute, but just wanted to quickly flag the Kim Muir market first because this is probably the best place to start with this case. Like looking at the market as it is currently, we've got back to normal into favourite now, and he went up £12 for winning on the weekend. He's up to a mark of 142. I didn't hear any obvious signs that the Kim Muir was next on the agenda. Perhaps that is what they're thinking. But still, like he's now 7 to 1 favourite in places. Like I just wouldn't even see him running, to be honest with you, even if he did get into the race, which would be touch and go. You've got Percival Legalwar in there. He can't even run. He's rated too high. Got Johnny Who is in there. I think he's a horse who's just kind of gone off the ball this season. I know they've been fiddling around with him, but he absolutely bolted up on his chase debut, winning, without having been breathed on. He's since gone up to 3 miles a couple of times, and he's just finished absolutely nowhere. So I'm just not convinced on him being a proper stayer as much as they're trying to get him well handicapped. So I'd be happy to leave him. Now as the hour's in there, he's seemingly going for the National Hunt Chase. He's favourite for that. Hashting's in there. He needs another run. You've got Nine Graces, who's probably the first runner that you come to that you could say is definitely being targeted here, but she's rated 130. So I don't know, is she good enough for a race like this? We'll have to find out. Answer to Cave's in there. He's gone up plenty as well for winning a race the other day. He's up at 142, I think, as well. So the novice handicap is probably where he'll end up anyway. Transmission's also in there. Again, National Hunt Chase has been touted as his target. Cletus Poulor needs another run. Search for Glory was too high when he was rated. He was rated 147 in the BHA the other day. Obviously, he runs like stinks since, so maybe he'll get dropped a couple, but he'd still be top weight if he got in here. Will Do just doesn't seem good enough. Like there's so many in this market where you can just go through and almost rule them out, or if not, say that they've got plenty to prove. So you're kind of looking through and you're kind of thinking that there's a very big opportunity here for a Kim Muir favourite to pop out. And that horse is actually going to be a horse who last year was really well fancied for handicaps and gave the handicapper a bit of a headache in Sama Jest, who has I thought he's done really well over fences so far this season. He started his career at Galway, where he was actually second to Search for Glory. Search for Glory took up the lead, and it was never for catching that day. He stayed on for second, beating 8 lengths. But I thought he stayed on quite nicely over 2.6 that day. They then stepped him up to 3 miles at Tipperary at like near to the end of November. And it looked like a decent race on paper. It's worked out quite well because Shannon Royale was in the race. Captain Cody was back and forth, just having one of his first couple of spins. Cletus Poulor was actually in that race and fell. But Sama Jest that day, like he properly showed that he is an absolute out and out stayer to me. Like he really did have to battle. There was snow on the track and everything. Like it was a proper testing conditions, and he's gone and beaten Shannon Royale, getting up in the final stride of the race. Beat him a short head. Obviously, Shannon Royale, he disappointed in the Fiestes when making his handicap debut, but he's gone on to win since then and also finished second to Dancing City. So he's shown himself to be a pretty useful animal over fences, and Sama Jest had battled really strongly to beat him. He was last seen at Limerick in the Grade 1, where obviously if you're going to be looking at handicaps, you don't want to be getting anywhere near close in a Grade 1. Finishing 5th place behind Imperial Pass that day. He was ahead of the likes of Mirrors of West and Waterford Whispers, who, are potential handicap plots in themselves. But he was also just behind Goodland, who I think has kind of enhanced his profile and potentially could be one to look at for the novice handicap if he's back to the horse of old. So I think he's got some very decent form in the book, but the kicker is he's running at Fairyhouse on Wednesday in a rated chase. So it's a 3 mile rated chase. You're basically running off your handicap marks from how it's worked out. But the likes of Phil Dore, Affordale Fury, Any Second Now, and Manila Kroon are in there against him. He's obviously getting weight from all of them because he's got a rating of 137 in Ireland. That might be the thing that ends up being the undoing of this case, because if he went and won off that mark, I know he's getting weight, but I do think that it would be then very touch and go if he'd get under that 0 to 145 ceiling. But potentially they're not going to look to win. Obviously, I have no idea. Paul Townend is booked, which is a bit interesting because potentially that does mean they are looking to go and take that out, because Paul wouldn't ride these horses for no reason. But if he could go finish a good second to an Affordale Fury or a Phil Dore or something like that, and have his mark barely touched, like he's off 137 in Ireland, that'd probably be 140 in Britain, maybe a tiny bit higher. Like I think that he could end up being a proper plot for the Kim Muir. Derek O'Connor could be the rider, and he could be JP's favorite for the race. Like he'll definitely be shortening in the market. Obviously, last year he was really well fancied for a Martin Piper initially, and then he went to the Coral Cup, didn't run any sort of race, but because he ran 2 bad races in Britain, he was 16th in the Coral Cup. He then went to Sandown on the final day of the season, was 6th there as well. I don't think the handicapper has the same sort of headaches with him that he would have done this time last year. Obviously, going into the race last year, he beat Noble Yates in a rated hurdle, and that really gave the handicapper a decision of what to do with him. He ended up not treating them that harshly, but I think now he won't have the same sort of worries about that. And considering what he's done over fences, I don't think you can race him too badly, and especially you can't rate him over that 145 ceiling. So I'm just looking at Sam and Jess thinking 3 mile, 1.5 furlongs in the Kim Muir could be absolutely perfect for him. He would have a top condition. Obviously, he's got the best connections. I know Willie Mullins in the handicap chase isn't the ideal stat, but this could be the one that really does go off favourite and give you something to think about.
What I love about this time of year as well is that it's like the only time really ever when you're cheering for a horse to finish second or third, which is what you're going to be doing.
Yeah,
I was hoping for that all weekend. It was a similar story most of the weekend, to be honest. It really is.
Yeah, there was a fair few, but yeah. He's currently 16 to 1, which I think is a fair price to take, and chance him being a very eye-catching second. If he's an eye-catching second or third, then he will be smashed for this race.
Okay, we'll be keeping an eye out for that for sure, Jake. Best of luck, and a great case made as ever. Right, down to me, I suppose, for the last Ante-Post tip. I've been brutalised in the comments recently, particularly last week by Let's Talk Racing, about my tips. But I don't quite understand how people be having a go, because the whole point about Ante-Post tips, they haven't actually run yet, so we don't know how they're going to do. So, yeah, just hold your horses, everybody, before you start laying in. But that said, I'm about to put a horse up in the Boodles, which is one of probably the most competitive or hardest race to choose a winner of in the whole festival. It's definitely up there, at least. And I'm going to put up a horse called Terra Firma for the Jack Jones team. Jack is a young trainer who's done really well, actually, both on the flat and over jumps over the last few seasons. He's got a new trainer, but he's got a very bright head on his shoulders, and he does well with flat horses going hurdling, as he showed with last year's and Brendan Fasher, who was a pretty decent horse in this kind of sphere, a very similar type to Terra Firma. And it's part of the reason why I've gone with Terra Firma, because I think he's almost a better type of horse than Brendan Fasher was. And he still managed to win the same race at Cheltenham over Christmas, or just before Christmas, last year, as Terra Firma did this year, which is one of the Triumph trials at Cheltenham. But I'll start with Terra Firma before I get to the similarities between the two. It's quite strange, really, because Terra Firma is a half brother to a 5 furlong all-weather winner. And I wouldn't have thought when they bought him as a yearling at 80,000 guineas, they thought Boodles is going to be the way forward for this one. But he has got stamina in the pedigree. His dam is a half sister to a 1.5 mile Group 2 winner, so there's plenty of stamina there. And I have to say, I thought he looked all stamina when he won on Hurdle's debut for Jack Jones in that same race that Brendan Fasher won last year. The meeting before Christmas at Cheltenham, dead heating he did with Quantock Hills. But he was definitely the one to take out of the race because he flew home. And the further he went, the better he looked, really. So I thought there was no issue with stamina there. He's got quite an interesting profile, really, Terra Firma, because he started out with Joseph O'Brien, was gelded before his first start on the flat. He had a couple of starts on the flat, and then he went hurdling straight away. I think they just thought this is a horse who looks like he's going to be more of a hurdler than a flat horse, and they were right, because his first start at Killarney was a winning one. He won pretty easily on good ground. It was good ground again when he won at Down Royal. Then he went to Listowel and came second to Zainab, another really decent effort. That was back in September. And unfortunately, I'm not privy to how much money he was sold for changing owners, but I imagine it was a fair bit because he'd already won twice. He finished second to Zainab and has a pretty nice profile, a progressive one too. So leaving Joseph O'Brien, he went to Jack Jones, changed ownership, and then, as I say, made that stable debut in the Cheltenham race and won alongside Clontarf Hill's Dead Heating. They shared that one. And then, of course, he went to Cheltenham on Trials Day and ran behind East India Dock, finishing 4th of 10, in ground that I really don't think would have suited him. I don't think he wants soft ground. I think he wants anything better than that. Good to soft or better. Hopefully he'll get some nice spring ground at the Cheltenham Festival. But I still think he ran a pretty good race behind East India Dock. Terra Firma was never likely to be a Triumph Hurdle contender. Yes, he was entered in the race. He's 100 to 1 for it, but he won't go there. Jack Jones said after this fourth placed effort in that Triumph trial that he's going to go for the Fred Winchell, the Boodles, and that looks the obvious place for him. Now, the reason that I like this horse so much is that I think he, as I say, he's a better version of Anbred and Fascia. And if you watched that horse last year in the Boodles, he actually hit the front coming down the hill towards the home turn. Before, I think he just got a little bit unstuck in the ground. It was heavy ground that day, and he didn't get home. As a flatbred, staying, and a proper flatbred as well, staying wasn't really his forte. And particularly in heavy ground, I think he found it all a bit too much in that race. He finished 8th, which was very creditable. But ever since then, he's been a bit regressive, and I think that rather bottomed out a little bit. Before that, he'd looked quite a progressive sort. Whereas I think Terra Firma, and Jack Jones has confirmed this, is more of a staying type than Anbred and Fascia was, which gives me a lot of hope as regards getting up that Cheltenham Hill. We saw him fly up it just before Christmas, and one of the other things that really drew me to him was he's been dropped £2 after that effort in the Triumph trial. I thought it was quite nice, the handicapper, actually. I thought you could easily have left him on 128, but he's down to 126, which leaves him sort of middle towards the bottom of the weight, middle to bottom of the weight for the Boodle, which is a lovely place to be. Hopefully, this is the time that Jack Jones can really come on the scene in the hurdling division, because he had a big winner on the flat last year in the Weatherby Super Sprint, and I'm hoping that he can do the same over obstacles, because he's definitely got a bright future. And Terra Firma looks more of a decent fit, I think, than Anbred or Fascia was last year. And remember, he hit the front in ground that didn't suit, and he didn't quite get home. But hopefully Terra Firma will, and hopefully the ground will be on the sounder side for him. So he'd be my pick this week in the Boodles. Good stuff, guys. That brings us to an end of week 5. We're really cantering along, aren't we? We're getting there now. I mean, it's always quite scary, isn't it, Jake? When we get to that point, we've got like 10 or 11, 12 selections in our Ante-Post book, and we're approaching the first day, and you're thinking, just one or two come in. Just get me over the line for one or two.
It's normally all you need, yeah. You normally only need one to make a profit. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll probably do a review of our selections maybe next week or the week after, just to see where we are at almost the halfway stage. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how we get on from now on, where we have less and less racing to go off. Yeah,
what I probably should have mentioned as well, Dan, is that your 40 to 1 selection, Toontivator, I've rather followed suit. Not quite as big a price, but Terra Firma 25 to 1, which I think is very fair. And a nice each way selection. Not quite as juicy as your odds, though.
No, well, that seems to be the theme at the minute. I say I set myself an imposed mark of seemingly 16 to 1 minimum, and I normally end up doubling it every week, or even in sometimes thinking about 6, which worked really well with a certain Albert Bartlett mule. But there we are. Look, it's one of those. It's all about getting horses there on the day that they're going to be shorter. That's what we're trying to do. Obviously, I think I've only had one horse run since I put one up. To be honest, I've had very limited actual progression with some of them. So we're getting to that time now where non-run bets coming in, more handicaps are being assessed. It's getting crunch time, really. And as you say, chances are a lot of the horses who are going to line up there have probably already had their last run before we see them in March. So less and less evidence to go on, but more time to get stuck into some of those handicap markets, especially as the deadline for qualifying runs does edge closer.
Yeah, and as soon as you know the Grand National weights are coming out, which they are this week, then you know, you're getting pretty close to the Cheltenham Festival. Okay, good stuff, guys. Thanks very much for this week. I hope you all enjoyed and have liked our video. We'd love to get to that 300 like mark, or even 250 would be great. I think Jake's written down 250, but I'm quite optimistic. And subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the road to 3,000, so please do get involved. But until next time, which will be Ante-Post Selection 6, it's goodbye from us here on The Jump Show.